So last week we discussed, as a matter of review, two things in particular. Number one, we had a kind of overview of the many divergent theories of aliens and what it could possibly mean that the phenomenon called aliens, or whatever you want to call it, ufology, I don't know how that word is, but I've never heard anyone say that word. I've just seen it written. How that subject could possibly spawn all of these divergent theories with, vigorous and enthusiastic supporters of each of them, but they're at odds with one another. They tend to be self-contradictory. And so what does it mean? Maybe there's a deeper kind of truth underlying the fact of all of the theories that aliens provoke. And then second, the idea of ontological provocation. The idea that to study ontology, the study of being, to study being seriously is not merely to study concepts about being or descriptions. If you want to truly study being in a deep way, you have to be willing to participate in that. You have to be open to examining the ideas that you have about reality, the story that you tell yourself about what the world is and who you are, all of the things that you take as givens, and maybe you don't even realize most of the time that these things are true for you. You have to be willing to examine them, let them go, replace them, think about them differently. You have to be willing to take on other theories of being. And I don't want to spend a lot of time in this class. And that's why I did it in the form of reading, because we only have 7 weeks. I don't want to spend a lot of time going over the specifics, the accounts. For the purpose of this class, we're just going to look at some of the themes that we might draw out of the accounts that we read. Because as we discussed last week, and just a moment ago in the review, the theorization that goes along with the phenomenon, UFOs and aliens, tends to move out in 100 different directions and be kind of difficult to pin down, difficult to wrap your head around. There's always kind of the temptation to want to pull all of this into a single unified theory of what the facticity of aliens actually is. But there is a danger in that that we might lose the forest for the trees. So rather than getting too far into the specifics, we're just going to look very briefly over the themes that emerge from the encounters that people have and what those themes might actually tell us, and how maybe that will give us a clearer understanding than the specific interpretations that people develop. So we'll start with the idea of deception that is present throughout the phenomenon. The idea that the aliens are, for one thing, that they could be made up entirely, that they could be a kind of fictional mythology being seeded into the public consciousness, that these accounts could be fake somehow. And the whole phenomenon could be generated by a government or secret society or other actual aliens, I guess. So there's that you always kind of have to contend with. Although I think it's pretty hard to actually maintain that hypothesis in the face of the number of accounts and the time span across which we've seen them all. But even without that idea, there's still very much present the element of deception in aliens and UFOs. So people will often describe, well, first of all, they have their The idea of memory is very central oftentimes. The idea that the aliens have tampered with their memories or provided them under hypnosis or something with kind of fake memories. Oftentimes people will remember their encounters only years after the fact. And so, of course, there's a deception here. And then there's also many different levels of deception. These things often occur to people who are involved with high-level politics and secret societies. There's the idea that the aliens are meddling in some way with human affairs at the highest possible level, and even that they could be intertwined with the history of religious phenomena, and that human history itself could be a product of alien tampering. And this is another thing that goes in different directions, because this can be interpreted as malevolent tampering, that they are trying to keep us as a kind of slave race, or on the other hand, maybe that they are trying to help us to ascend, and so that they are inserting themselves with a light touch in order not to scare us, but trying to guide humanity in a positive way. Both of these elements you will see, they're kind of at odds with each other, which is why we're just drawing on the theme of deception, because that's the constant here, is that there's an involvement that they have with us that is something other than what it appears to be. That is something kind of, that there is an alien intentionality, or in plural intentionalities, that are being carried out without our knowledge, and that we can only kind of catch glimpses of them in the form of the encounters. There's also a sense of the unknown, the vast cosmological unknown that appears forcefully, and this is present in the mere sighting of UFOs. People will come away from UFO sightings, and it will be kind of a pivotal experience of their lives. It's something that they never forget. It's a major shakeup to their understanding of what the world is, even though they don't know how to interpret it. And when they do know how to interpret it, they interpret it all kinds of different ways. But the constant, again, is that there is a sense in which the unknown is kind of puncturing the veil of the known, and just appearing in front of you as maybe a flying saucer, as some kind of alien technology, or in the case of other abductions, as an encounter with creatures themselves. Along with that, there is a dramatic sense of power or powerlessness, a shift in which the individual comes to understand their role in the universe, I guess, because you have encounters, or even up to abductions, in which the individual is made to suddenly feel totally at the mercy of something so far beyond them, technologically, or in terms of power, that these creatures can abduct them from their home, and suddenly that the people don't have the power that they thought they had, that they're suddenly rendered just powerless. And then also with power, you have the kind of political element, the idea that these things are trying to assert themselves in all kinds of different ways to puppeteer us, that they are in some way controlling, again, either for better or for worse, or both. And with that, you have another theme, which is trauma. Very often, especially with abductions, you have a sense of deep, profound trauma that sometimes people never recover from. You have people being bladed, people being taken out of their homes suddenly, people being given implants, forced implants, the trauma with aliens that are trying to perhaps hybridize with us or in some way use the of humans, or maybe just to learn about it. They're doing research or something, but somehow these great powerful forces are coming down and inflicting trauma on people. And sometimes, not nearly as often, but sometimes there's kind of the opposite, which is like a catharsis, wherein people will interpret these things as like angels, and they're overcome with understanding or love or feeling of comfort and happiness. And sometimes that is enduring throughout it is enduring in their life, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a moment that they look back on and wonder. And then finally, maybe we have, well, not finally, we have technology, which kind of goes along with the power and deception and unknown. The idea that these things have a capacity to manipulate reality that is beyond ours. They have a mastery over reality that is greater than ours. And then that oftentimes takes the form of technologies, flying saucers, whatever the abduction thing is, the tractor beams or 0-point energy, or the little implants that they give people and then suddenly they just disappear one day. And the ability that they have to move across space and even perhaps across time using the technologies that they've developed, presumably. And maybe we should include in that the sense of telepathy that people report, of being able to communicate with these beings, not through spoken language or anything even audible, but through, well, telepathy, through just having the ideas suddenly appear in their mind. That in and of itself is like a different kind of technology. It's another case, another way in which the beings, the aliens, have a kind of mastery over reality that we do not. Oh yeah, time also. Maybe take that as a separate one. The idea of like people's sense of time being disrupted, both in the idea of lost time. People who report abductions will say that they either were up there for a long time and then came back down and very little time at all had elapsed, or even the opposite, where that they many reports, there are many reports of, and perhaps this is just tampered memory, but people who have had alien encounters and then later on they will report just long stretches of lost time, missing time, where they're driving down the road or they are in their house in one moment and they don't fall asleep, they don't do anything. Maybe they're even with their family, so there's no way that they could just disappear or fall asleep and have no one notice, but suddenly it's 6 hours later than it was. And that's on the individual scale, but there's also this recurring theme of time as something under the control of the aliens, either with time travel or with the meddling of the manipulation that they do in human timelines, whether it is in the deep past, interfering with things or guiding things in a certain way, but also the sense in which these things seem to come from or direct us towards different futures. And you can see that, of course, in the technology, but also a lot of the theorization that people have around aliens from the accounts of the encounters has to do with the aliens in some way trying to direct even our evolution in one direction or another. And so if we look at all of these themes together, you have trauma, you have this cosmic sense of the unknown, you have the power and the powerlessness, these deep feelings that people, it's like a reorientation of one's own relationship to power and powerlessness, deception, technology, time. All of these things are in their own way, and again, they interact with one another. They're not precisely separate things usually, but they all represent major breaks or disruptions in the individuals or the collectives, humanity's sense of what reality is, our theory of being, our ontology, all of the different forms. This is why, rather than focusing on the specific theories that people have generated, if you take it all together, in any case, whichever theory might be true or false, in any case, what you have is a major ontological shift, a major disruption, a break in what our understanding of reality is, and that it might be something very different. And maybe there's no way for us to know. So let's try and do a quick kind of default 21st century understanding of ontology. Let's kind of build really quickly, not particularly precisely, a map of reality. So we're going to start with the world, the universe, physics. The world is made up of atoms that operate according to strict physical laws, which you could think of as like protocols. So everything you see is made up of atoms, right? And it goes deeper than that. It goes into quanta. We might get there later, but for now, let's stick with atoms. And they're like kind of like Legos. They're like the building blocks of the world. Everything is made from the atoms, and the atoms interact with each other according to physical laws. And that's kind of what science does. Physics and chemistry, you look at the material stuff and understand how it works. Kind of zoom in or out, depending on how you want to look at it. You get from physics to us, to not just humans, but biology. You have these creatures that, according to the same physical laws, using the same building blocks, same atoms, the same stuff, has emerged all of the biological beings, all of the creatures, and ultimately humans, or maybe not ultimately, but at least ultimately for us right now, we have humans who are made out of the very same stuff, according to the very same laws, of course, but we have the unique-ish ability to interact with the material world. We can manipulate things in order to serve our needs. We're not just, or at least it does not appear that we are just existing in the worlds, having our needs either met for us or not, but we're able to actually go out and to change the world and to meet our needs. So we've got the big brains, we have a lot of intelligence, and with that intelligence we use technologies. And you can think of technologies as like computers and stuff, but more fundamentally, technologies are just like, basic tools, but not even just basic tools, but concepts even. The very idea that you could, for example, farm, you could grow your food instead of scavenge for it. Just that very idea is itself a technology, and it leads to the other technologies of how specifically that is done. But being able to look out onto the world and to use your brain to discover or have revealed to you new ways of having your needs met. That's kind of the genesis of technology. And so through all of that, humans continue to grow, brains continue to get bigger, IQs go up, and we have now a kind of understanding that not only is all of this happening, not only are we in this world manipulating this matter according to the very same laws, but we also have something called consciousness. We also have the experiential reality, which is separate from the atoms, right? How is it separate? Well, that's a complicated question. The way that we experience reality, our sense of touch, our vision, our smell, there's a couple other ones I can't remember. We receive the input of the material world, and through that input, we generate kind of a conscious understanding of where we are, what's around us, and how we can use it. And with consciousness, so we have, there's the physics, the atoms, and then there's us. We're built on top of the atoms, and then built on top of us is this thing called consciousness, which is like the experience of being us, which is kind of peculiar. And then built on top of consciousness, you have all kinds of other strange things that we have usually a very difficult time of explaining. So we have the capacity to create stories, to understand time in a way that's not just random, but has a kind of beginning, middle, end. We create stories about reality that are themselves technologies in a way, and they help us understand things as more or less meaningful. So with consciousness comes the idea of things being meaningful, of one thing being like, it appears to us as kind of shiny in a way, because that's a meaningful thing versus a non-meaningful thing. We have the illusion, perhaps, maybe it's not an illusion. We have the idea that the feeling, the conscious experience that when we go out into the world, we are choosing, we, separate from the material world, separate from all of the atoms out there, we are choosing how we are going to interact with the world, how we are going to manipulate the world to serve our needs. We have the experience of free will, that there is something other than just the physical laws. At least that's how it feels to us. We have, across all cultures and all human experience, the feeling of connection to the world, of spirituality, of kind of a depth to conscious experience that is beyond the immediate experience itself. We have emotions, which are not, they're not made out of atoms, they have a kind of interaction point. They have, maybe they come from atoms, you would say, right? The chemicals in your brain correspond with the emotions, but they're not the same as the feeling, the conscious feeling. That's what I'm saying. Emotions are very removed, either up or down or out from the physics. They are sensations. They exist strictly in consciousness, whether or not they have correlates in physics. We have desire. We have not just, the immediate desire for what we might need right now as far as food or air, but we have kind of a complex landscape of things that we want. We have the sense of attraction and repulsion. We have pleasure and pain. We have ethics and values. All of that is very far removed from the layer of physics, the atoms. But all of that stuff is kind of core to our experience of reality. So that's the kind of quick default ontology from, let's just say, from atoms to ethics. You have the physical world, and then we are on top of that physical world, and then all of the strange, mysterious conscious experiences on top of us or come emergent from us. Okay, but this account of reality, let's call it ontology 1, the default, has a few shortcomings. It has a few problems. So it is an attempt, a noble attempt to understand all of reality under a single framework, to create a coherent map of being, of reality, of the universe. But the problem is, let's say threefold. The problem is threefold. Number one, the physics account of the universe and of biology and of our world, it kind of doesn't have a way to account for consciousness other than to say that consciousness is emergent from that. So it's called dualism, the idea that you have physics, science, our understanding of the world, and then while that can manifest descriptions of consciousness and how consciousness interacts with the physical world, like psychology, it doesn't have any account for why consciousness is there in the first place. It doesn't make any sense at all. Why? Because when you watch a clock tick or a car drive down the road, those things operate, they function perfectly coherently, perfectly well, without there needing to be any consciousness, any kind of experiential functioning of the car or the clock. And so not only do we not know, maybe we just don't know yet how consciousness comes about, how out of all of physics, out of all of the atoms, how that leads to consciousness, which is a very different thing. And so in the typical understanding of reality, consciousness is separate. It's duality. There's two aspects of reality and they don't fit together. The best we could say is that one is emergent out of the other, but that doesn't really explain why it's there in the first place. And the other problem with the ontology we just laid out, ontology 1, the other problem is that it falls apart at the edges. So both at the macro scale of cosmology, astrophysics, you have an account of the physics of the universe that, in order for the math to work, in order for all of the equations to actually be true, to be right, and they're not just arbitrary, they are very useful for calculating things, and so in that sense they are true. But in order for them to actually work out in regards to the the mass of the universe or of a galaxy, in order for the equations to work, there's something that is just theoretical called dark matter, which cannot be observed. We don't know where it comes from. We don't even know what it is. It just theoretically must exist for the equations to even make any sense. And then at the other end, the micro, quantum, you have all of the quantum experiments which have demonstrated something that you've probably heard many times, but let's try and let it sink in a little bit. What could it possibly mean that in order for a experiment in the quantum realm to be carried out? This is like the double slit experiment or Schrodinger's cat, the idea that quantum phenomena are affected, not like in some trivial way, but are dictated by observation. by consciousness. The reality of where a photon or whatever goes in the double slit experiment, where it ends up, how the material stuff moves, how the physical laws work, depends entirely on consciousness, on whether it's being observed or not. And that does not make any sense in regards to our normal understanding of physics, of reality. And it totally flies in the face of the idea that consciousness could be a emergent, strange property of physics. It points to the fact that somehow the dual understanding of physics with, consciousness, and maybe we just don't quite know how it works yet, is wrong, because somehow consciousness circles back and actually affects the most basic stuff of all, the quanta. And so our typical understanding of the world is very useful, in some cases undeniably, there is truth in it because of all of the use that it has for us. But just in the same way that 1,000 years ago our understanding of the physics world was very different than it is now, it is clear, not just as a theory or an idea that it could be true, but it is undeniably capital T truth that physics understanding, that duality, is somehow nested within a bigger truth, which is non-duality. And in a way, we've always known this, because all of our ideas about physical reality, all of the experiments that we've carried out, all of the theories that have bounced back and forth and been proven and disproven and elaborated upon, all of the hypotheses that we've generated in order to create those theories, all of the needs, the desires that we've had that have generated the will to even observe these things, to carry out these experiments, the means by which we collect all of the data, the means by which we interpret all of the data. There is nothing that has ever been understood or discovered that has not come out of consciousness. All of our experience is consciousness, unfortunately. Unfortunately for ontology number one and its truth claims. Not just everything that you have ever experienced, will ever experience, could ever experience, but everything that everyone else has ever experienced, will, could, and all of the interactions that we've had with one another to generate these fields of study and the ideas about reality that come out of them have all come from, originated in, our experiential reality, the appearance of the world as it manifests in us. And so there is a unity of all of us, the unity of man and God, a sense in which meaning, God, capital G, God, instead of, we think of these things as being ideas that emerged out of the physical reality of the world. But the physical reality of the world, all of our ideas of that emerged out of meaning. Meaning came first, at least for us. Maybe there is some theoretical creature some theoretical thing, some theoretical sense in which reality exists separate from conscious experience of it, but not that we know of, not that we could really even imagine. And so it's kind of a humbling thing that we have to acknowledge that we don't know anything about the world out there that did not emerge from, as an idea, our experience of consciousness. And once you admit that, once you acknowledge that, because it's kind of obvious in a way, you have to, and you encounter Gödel's incompleteness theorem or Heidegger's Dasein. Why would we have any expectation that all of being can be understood by our being, human being, the experience that we have of the world that allows us to create these kind of projections and ideas and concepts of atoms and physical laws? Why would we assume that we're getting the full picture? Why would we assume that there's not aspects of being that are bigger than us, that are not necessarily distinguishable to us? And this is the core ontological provocation. This is capital G God. This is why your homework was what it was and what it will continue to be. Because everything I've just said to you, on one sense, is kind of simple. But if you take it all together, it ought to shatter your very sense of what reality is, what being is. Because we walk through the world, we go through the world, we do our day-to-day activities, our jobs. We carry out our will with the understanding that the world is out there and we are moving through it, manipulating it in order to get the things that we need. And while on the one hand that's very simple, it's actually very difficult to remember. You forget it. Every time you open your eyes, the visual field as it is simulated in your mind, it kind of shouts, "Here I am, here is the world." But that's just your consciousness. That's all just your consciousness that you see, that you interpret as the thing out there. Not to say that the thing out there is not there, but when you open your eyes, especially if you just do one eye, it's just a 2D projection. It's just a simulation that your big human brain puts up on the screen, so to speak. And now you think that you're seeing capital T truth. But capital T truth is much bigger than what you're seeing. Because what you're seeing is just a simulation. But you're also feeling with your toes. And you have sensation in your digestive tract. You got air in your lungs, you got blood pumping through your veins. You have smells, you have memories, desires, insecurities, fears. Hopes, beliefs, concepts, judgments, values. It's all there in one tangled web that we will call consciousness. to take one little aspect of it, one thread out of the ball of yarns, in this case, the visual field as projected for you, to take that and say, oh, that's the truth out there, and the rest of it is just some emergent thing that's completely wrong. But nonetheless, that is the way that our brains, the interpretation that our minds have of the material world, presents itself to us as truth. And so to be in a close relationship to actual capital T truth is to be continually reminding yourself that your ideas about reality are ideas about reality. They are concepts or projections or simulations, and that capital T truth, the actual thing that we're studying when we're studying ontology, being, is all of it taken together. God, not as a proposition, not as a box to check off of, yes, I believe that, and so that means that I do this and that and this, not as an axiom, but as a acknowledgement of reality, all of reality. And it gets very complicated, and we're going to go there. But the hardest part is this. In understanding it the way I'm laying it out for you as a series of propositions is not going to cut it. That's not the understanding that you need to understand aliens. That's not the understanding that you need to understand God. That's not the understanding that you need for capital T truth. In order to have that kind of understanding, it's more of a participation. It's something that you practice and you get better at. But it's very difficult. It's always going to be difficult because it is in our nature to fall for the appearance or the concepts or the ideas about reality rather than being truth itself. Because you don't want to get rid of the ideas about reality. That's what makes us us. That's what makes us humans. That's what gives us so much power, so much insight, so much technology. It absolutely allows us a deeper understanding of reality, but only if we don't get stuck in it and forget all of reality. Because however useful physics is, if you get confused, if you forget, and you think that the physics account of reality is capital T true, then you've forgotten everything. Everything else, at least, which is almost everything. And so, in a way, it's like walking a tightrope. It's because it's not just about remembering propositionally what I have said to you and how I've laid it out as a thing to believe in. It's about kind of staying on the tightrope. And this is why your homework is to believe in God, not as the thing that you were probably taught to believe in. Because there is the physics ontology, the dualist, the simulation. Are we good with that? Whatever you want to call it. the thing that you fall into, the not capital T truth, is so persistent, is so easy to confuse with capital T truth, that even the people who are most enthusiastic about spirituality or about God, even they forget what it is that they're enthusiastic about, and they're just enthusiastic. And that's why religions, all of them, all the time, while they are all, I would say, at their core about this pursuit of capital T truth, they all have the very same tendency to lose their way, to keep up the enthusiasm without the truth. And when that happens, well, this course is not about the failures and horrors that religion has carried out in the world, but I'm sure you're familiar with at least some of them, if not in your own tradition, with the traditions of others, but they're everywhere. Because this tendency is an inexorable aspect of what it's like to be a human being, is that we have this capacity to understand reality in such a way that we fall into the understanding. We delude ourselves. We think that the concepts are the real thing. All of a sudden I feel like a preacher or something. So if our understanding about reality, ontology 1 that we laid out at the beginning, is something that's actually nested within a much larger capital T truth, reality, being of consciousness, well then all of the mysteries that have evaded categorization, neat categorization according to the kind of academic study of what reality is, of what physics is, well, suddenly we can understand those things differently. Suddenly we're back to aliens. If you want to engage with capital T truth, if you want to really understand what's going on at any time in history, at any time, in any place, in your relationships, in your families, at work, in politics, in war, in art, if you want to understand what's really going on, you have to resist the urge to become stuck in ontology 1 and kind of make space for your own participation in the entire manifold of being as we experience it through consciousness. Because ontology 1 has never been able to account for. It can only kind of describe in mechanistic ways that are very unsatisfying, but it can't really account for story. It can't account for heroism, the draw we have towards heroism, how much we value that, or even value itself. There is no value in ontology 1. There's no ethics, emotion, spirituality, free will. If you believe in the physics account of reality, there's no place for free will. It would only make sense as an illusion, which is how people tend to think about it nowadays, especially, the smart people. They think free will is an illusion because they're so hyper-focused on the physics account of reality, that they become stuck in ontology one. But imagine living in a world in which free will existed and you didn't even believe in it. What kind of a deep irony is that? To live in a world in which you have free will, but you don't believe in it. You think it's just an illusion. All right, so readings this week. Got a little bit of Heidegger. More of the Giorgiani. Continue your practice, though. That's the main thing. Hopefully this lecture helped you understand what you're doing a little bit better. And maybe if you want to dive into a particular spiritual tradition, that might not be a bad idea. But as I've said, we're going to get more into that later on. What does God mean? So you've been practicing believing in God, but now maybe you have a little bit of clarity on what that might actually mean. And if you come into contact with it, you might describe it in a very different way than what I've described it, how I've described it. But all of this is necessary for philosophy, for aliens, for ontology. If we want to take it seriously, you have to believe in God, or at least have a deeper understanding of what it means to believe in God than the propositional beard man in sky thing. Good luck.